Hello there, welcome to my channel. This is the third part of a video series on the Boox Note Max, the 13-inch e-ink note-taking and reading device. And this video is going to focus on the keyboard Folio and Bluetooth keyboard. So we're just going to take a look at these things in action. We'll make some comparisons with some other devices, and then I'll wrap things up with my general thoughts. Okay, so let's open up the Note Max now that it's here in the keyboard Folio. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up and connect into the tabs. And then you'll hear a chime. There we go. And we're now connected. So you can see here, this pop-up window comes up. And there's a couple options which I can select. The first is you can go automatically into a landscape mode. I already had the device to auto-rotate, so I didn't necessarily need that, but that was selected. A shortcuts window will pop up. We'll see that when I click on OK. And you can also toggle that off. And then you can automatically switch to ultra-fast mode when the keyboard's connected. This is a curiosity because this device doesn't have ultra-fast mode. It does have A2, which is a rough equivalent, and it will switch to that A2 mode. But this is one of those examples where the keyboard Folio isn't exactly optimized for this particular device. The other example is you'll notice on the keyboard there are shortcuts 1, 2, 3, and 4 related to front lighting. This is the temperature, up and down, and then this is the intensity of the lighting, up and down. There is no front lighting on this device. So again, another example of, this idea that the Folio wasn't necessarily completely designed with the Note Max in mind. These are small things ultimately, but I think they are kind of worth pointing out, so I just wanted to share that. Let's go ahead and click OK. Now the shortcuts bar that we see here, the summary that is in two sections. So the first section are shortcuts that are available regardless of what type of keyboard you're using. So we're using the Folio in this case, but if we were using a Bluetooth keyboard, then the same functionality would exist there. Over here are shortcuts that are only available on this integrated keyboard. And those are also represented with icons that you can see here in the upper left portion of each key, going from 5 all the way over to the plus and equal sign. So you don't need to memorize these shortcuts because you have visual representations on the keyboard itself, but you would need to memorize these. Now you'll notice that up here in the notification bar, right next to the time, there's a little icon. If we swipe down, there's a couple things we can do. The first thing is if I click on that shortcut link, it'll bring up that shortcut window, which we already saw. So if you forgot how to do a particular shortcut, it's always right there. But you can also go right into settings by clicking on this link. You see we're here in the settings, and these are particularly around the keyboard settings. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these, but I will go over a few of them that I think are notable. We'll start off with the trackpad gestures. We'll go ahead and click on that. Some of the gestures are customizable. The first 3 are, and then the remaining 4 are not. So this one is currently set to refresh. So if I swipe up with 3 fingers, it'll refresh. So I do something like that. If I click on the custom button, these are all the options that are available, and these are the same options that are available on the next 2 swipes as well. So let's go ahead and go back, and then we'll click on to back is currently the default on that one, and then screenshot with 4 fingers is there. So all customizable with the same menu. Now, the next 4 are just set. So we've got 3 fingers to the side is to switch apps. If we've got 2 fingers, we can kind of scroll on the screen. We've got pinch to zoom, that's automatic. And then drag an object by holding. So those are all the gestures that are available on the trackpad, which is just beyond view of the camera. If we go further into the settings, we do have the ability for the pointer speed of the tracker. So if I touch the tracker, you can see the little pointer there. And I'll just go back and forth, a little bit choppy. Let's go ahead and go to the full speed, or near the full speed, and you can see, woo, it just really zips around. And if you go down to the lowest levels, then it's quite slow. So I've been using it about here to the extent that I use the tracker at all. The distance from the pad to the screen is a matter of inches. So for me, it's always better to use the touch screen than to use the mouse. That's been my personal experience and preference. So I'm not a fan of using the touchpad to get a pointer, but you can do gestures from the touchpad, again, like refresh, as we just saw there, and that works fairly well. So that's kind of a summary of the settings that are available for the keyboard. Okay, let's see how the keyboard performs in Notes. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Notes. We're going to start a new one, and then we're going to make it a text note. And we'll just make it just a blank generic text note. And I'm going to go ahead and change the style just so the format is easier to see. All right, and let's type and see what it looks like. Oh, just before we do, let's go ahead and check our Eink Center settings. Okay, just to validate, we're on A2. And here we go. Okay, and there it is. It's not bad. I do notice a slight bit of choppiness, and we'll compare this to other devices that I think are just a little bit more responsive to put that into perspective. Let's go ahead and look then at Microsoft Word and look how that performance might differ. So I'm just going to open up a blank screen. We'll turn up the font, say to 20. Okay. And by the way, anytime you touch the screen, the on-screen keyboard will come up. So that's one of the oddities of, even though it knows I'm in the Folio, as you can see by that indicator there, it still brings up this screen regardless of the app if you touch the screen. So I'm finding that the behavior is the same in the Word app as it is in their native Notes app. So it doesn't seem to matter what app you're using. The behavior of the typing seems very similar to me. Okay, so now we're going to try something a little different. Instead of using the Folio keyboard, I've went ahead and connected this Bluetooth keyboard, and I'm going to type the same words out, and we'll see how the performance varies. And note that you can have a Bluetooth keyboard at the same time with the Folios connected. So these can coexist or, of course, exist separately as well. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, and spelling errors aside, let's see if we can go ahead and correct that. There we go. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a difference in terms of the spacing. So for example, the word "the" on the first line is a little bit further along than the word "the" on the second line. And why is that? Well, the reason why is because there is this problem with the Folio keyboard that I've been experiencing where it's inserting multiple spaces. So you can see that here between looks and like, and you can see it here between on and the. There's two spaces between both of those word pairs, but I didn't type two spaces, and you can see I typed it perfectly fine when using the Bluetooth keyboard. So this is definitely a design flaw, at least in the keyboard that I've received. Whether this is true for all the keyboards, of course, I don't know, but I have experienced this on the Folio. Let's go ahead and then go into Word and look at the performance there. And I think as you can see, the performance, regardless of whether you're using the Bluetooth keyboard or the Folio, really does look pretty much the same. So as a contrast, I thought I would kind of show off what I think is a little bit of a snappier performance in typing. And I'm using the Boox Note Air 4C. I'm also in the Notes app, like we were with the demonstration with the Max and a text file. And I've connected the same Bluetooth keyboard. In this particular case, if we scroll down and go into the Eink Center, you'll notice that we are on the ultra fast mode. That's the mode that was indicated when we connected the Bluetooth keyboard to the Max, It doesn't exist on the Macs, but it does exist on this UI. Let's go ahead and refresh that screen, and let's see what it looks like to type. And there is what it looks like. I think it's not a huge difference between the two devices, but I really do think that the Note Air 4C is just a little bit snappier, and I feel a little more connected as I type on the device. Just for another point of reference, this is the Bigme B51C, which is a device that I've reviewed. I didn't recommend it, but that's a story for another time. And this is actually also in a keyboard Folio. So this is a 10-inch device that comes with a keyboard Folio. This is running a similar screen as the Note Air 4C. It's a Kaleido 3 screen. And let's take a look at how this integrated keyboard works in a text file within their Notes app. Okay, so again, we see performance that's very similar, I think, to the Note Air 4C, and just a little snappier than what we have on the Boox Max. But again, not a huge difference, but it's certainly a difference that I notice. So I'm holding in my hands the keyboard Folio and the device for the Boox Tab Ultra C, and this came out about 2 years ago. And one of the controversies of it was only about 6 months later, in which it was essentially replaced. And not only did the replacement replace the device, it replaced the Folio itself. So this keyboard Folio, which originally came out with the Tab Ultra C, was not usable for any other device, including its successor. And that was a little bit of an area of consternation for folks that had purchased this device. Now, one of the interesting things about this is there were some learnings that clearly took place between the release of this device and its successor, which was the Tab Ultra C Pro. And one of those learnings was around the Folio itself and how it connected. And you can see here that there's pins on this device, but that's it. Otherwise, it's just a groove that the device sits in. And of course, there's magnets in this groove. The problem when people use this particular Folio is that they found that a lot of times there would be a disconnect on these pins, especially when they had the device in their lap, and that was an issue. So that got resolved in the subsequent device, the Tab Ultra C Pro, by putting the pins behind the device and connecting the device such that it could be put in multiple different angles, which you can't do on this one. This could only go in one angle, as you see there. So what's odd about that is with the Note Max, they essentially returned to the same form factor as this Ultra C. And so we can see here, just to demonstrate, if we go like this, it's pretty much similar to that device. Now, one critical difference, however, is that on the Max, there are these plastic tabs here and here, and the magnets seem a little bit stronger. I did do a little bit of a test with the Max on my lap, and I typed heavily, and it wiggled around, but it never lost its connection. So it seems like they did address that particular issue that we had with the Tab Ultra C, in that it didn't disconnect, at least in my brief testing. So they did at least improve on that. But it's odd, though, that the other lesson they learned was not carried forward onto the Max, which is the Max only exists in one angle. Curiously, Bigme has released their own keyboard cover. We did a demonstration of that, and this is what it looks like. And Bigme actually has kind of figured it out. They've got a flap on the back that can be bent like this, and this is very similar, I believe, to how the Tab Ultra C Pro worked. So you can have the screen at multiple angles based on how you bend this. So it's curious why the Note Max didn't have that ability, and it only has one angle for the screen. So that's one thing to comment on. The other thing I want to point out is that the case is a little bit floppy. So if you look here at the corner, there's a little bit of an open space here at the edge. And what that means is that the case is not particularly rigid. So it can go like this, where it's not necessarily aligned all time. So it's just a touch floppy in that regard, which is not a huge issue, but it doesn't feel as premium as the device itself feels. So it's just another example of where the Folio, I don't think, quite lives up to the Note Max device itself. I pointed out earlier in the video that there were a couple features of the keyboard Folio that wasn't related to the Note Max at all. The fact that it has front lighting controls, and the fact that when the software comes up, it mentions ultra fast when this doesn't have that refresh setting. So one might imagine that perhaps the keyboard Folio is designed for future devices in mind, and that may be the case. Oddly though, the two devices that have preceded this, the two Boox devices that had keyboard Folios, which I've already mentioned, the Tab Ultra C and the Tab Ultra C Pro, both had keyboard Folios that were unique to those devices and couldn't be used on other devices. So it's not clear to me if this device the keyboard Folio was intended to be used on future devices, or if this was just kind of sloppiness in putting together something generic for the Note Max. My overall impressions of the Folio is that I think that someone should just go with a Bluetooth keyboard and forego the Folio. Just use the case that has the groove so you can put it into one or two different positions depending on the lighting situation that you're dealing with, and then just carry around another keyboard. The effects on the screen are the same, at least from my eyes. And yes, it's going to be two pieces as opposed to one that you'd have to carry around, but you can purchase that Bluetooth keyboard at a much cheaper price. You can get a mechanical Bluetooth keyboard like I have, and I really prefer typing on a mechanical keyboard. I find I'm actually more accurate in this type of keyboard than the more chiclet style. I'm not sure that's exactly technically an accurate description of these keyboards, but that's kind of how I think about them. So you can just be a little bit better off for cheaper and get a better experience, even though it's not quite as convenient. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Okay, one last comment about the keyboard Folio, and it's regarding this flap. Now this is a design feature that really started, if my memory serves me, with the Boox Go 10.3. And when I first saw it, I had mixed feelings about it, but I think I was generally positive about it. And with the Boox Go 10.3, one of the neat features that kind of made me feel a little better about it is that you could use it as a stopper. So when you had the Boox go at an angle, it was prone to sliding, and you just connected this magnetic piece down and it would prevent it from sliding any further. So it had some utility. But as time has gone on, I've really come to learn to despise these things. And I just don't think that this is a form factor that I really want to see too much of. Does it work? Yes, it's tolerable, but I think Remarkable has shown us how to do this, and I really hope that this is the future. So with Remarkable, here's an example. You've got your flap here that rests when you're not using it in a groove. So there it is, kind of protecting the stylus, but when it's out of the way, it's completely flush with the back of the device, so you barely notice it. It's the best of all worlds, and it's way better than this flap. I hope that this is one of the last times we end up seeing this type of flap design, but I fear it's becoming more and more prevalent, and unfortunately it carries forward here with the Max Folio. Okay, so having gone over that, what are my overall thoughts of the keyboard Folio? And let's kind of start with the pros on that. The first pro is the obvious one, which is the integration. So you've got a cover that includes the keyboard. So that's kind of nice, it's convenient, it means you only have to carry one thing around. So that's positive. The connection, as far as I can tell, is quite secure. No issues with it disconnecting. I've only tested it kind of in a limited fashion, but I did kind of do a little bit of a stress test, and it seemed to handle that just fine. The keyboard shortcuts are nice. Some keyboard shortcuts are only available on the Folio, and they have nice icons that make it easy to identify. So you can refresh the screen, for example. You can take a screenshot, and there's a handful of other things too. So those are nice. The customizable gestures are pretty nice too, to be able to refresh the screen, for example. You can do pinch and zoom from the pad, and it works a little bit more like pinch and zoom works on other devices, which is different than what we saw in the previous video, where it was a little bit clunky. And I'll revisit that in the next video as we hone in again on the pinch and zoom, just to clarify how the Boox Max differs from other devices, and it doesn't seem to be as good. But the trackpad kind of addresses that a little bit and does give you a little bit more pinch and zoom control. The cons are that it's expensive. You're talking $150, not counting any type of shipping or what have you, or tax. And so that's up there. You can get Bluetooth keyboards for much less. The spacebar, as mentioned earlier in the video, sometimes adds an extra space. It did that both in the Word app as well as in the native Notes app. So it's a design flaw. Whether that's germane only to my unit or if that's with all keyboard folios, I guess we'll start finding out as additional reviews start coming out. You know, the floppiness of the case, it just doesn't feel quite as premium as the Note Max itself does. And it really does stand out because the Note Max feels like a great device. So I kind of feel like the keyboard, and I don't want to overstate this, but it does feel a little bit of a letdown relative to the device itself. It stands out and not in a good way. The flap is terrible. I've just talked about that. I won't say any more, but there you go. It only has one way to angle the stand. It's also quite close to the keyboard, so I find particularly when it's on my lap, you know, when I start typing on top of the screen, it's not so bad, but when I start looking down, I do feel like I'm looking down at quite a bit of an angle. Less of an issue if it's on the table, of course, but I wish it was angled differently, or could be angled differently, so it's a little more comfortable to look at. Not a huge issue, but it's something I did notice. Why does the screen keyboard come up when I've got my Folio attached? There's a number of little things about this Folio that I touched on through the course of the video, where little touches that make it less of a premium experience. And I don't want to overstate things. You know, it's none of these are the end of the world, but again, the device was so good, the keyboard Folio doesn't live up to that, and all these little things, like having, for example, controls for front lighting on a device that doesn't have front lighting, is an example that kind of undermines the feeling that the Folio is as premium as the device itself. So that's my general thinking. Again, my recommendation is forego the Folio, go with a Bluetooth keyboard, unless, you know, convenience is just a really huge issue, and then that would be a different story, I suppose. But I don't think the keyboard Folio adds a lot. And just as a device as a whole, I'm not sure I enjoy typing on the Note Max as much as I enjoy typing on, say, the Note Air 4C. And we saw in the demonstration earlier in this video those differences, and for some people I think maybe those differences will be nothing, but for me I just felt much more connected to the Note Air 4C, and just found it a little bit more of an enjoyable experience. It seems like a small thing, but as I was experiencing it, it felt bigger than it might appear. But that's just my own personal preference. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the keyboard Folio. Having completed this, we've talked about the main use cases for the device, which is the looking and document annotations. We've talked about the keyboard Folio. We didn't go into depth around the note-taking on the device, but we've done that in previous videos and other devices. And so I don't think there's anything more I need to show with that. I'll summarize my thoughts overall about what I think about the Note Max and who I recommend it for in the next video, which will be the final verdict. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Until then, I'll see you next time.